You know what time it is?
Where he go? Tell me something I don't know. Where's Gino? Oh shit, where he go? Tell me something I don't know. Where's Gino? Oh shit, where he go?
Gino Story Hour. Here we go.
Uh-oh, we can't hear him.
Uh-oh. It's what happens.
I had to mute for a second because I was putting my media ready. Okay, so let's make sure I can control it from where I am. Okay, here we go. So tonight's is a special Gino Story Hour. Let's see if I can pull up my. Here we go. I'd like to talk about one of the most famous missing person cases that happened in the last 100 years, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa.
Oh,
yeah. So for those of you young viewers of the Y-Files that don't know who Jimmy Hoffa was, he was the boss of all bosses. He ran the Teamsters Union, which was the most powerful union in America. They controlled everything from construction to trucking to entertainment. He was considered one of the most powerful men in America throughout the 60s and 70s. Pretty much no work got done in the entire country without his say-so. But when you're at the top, everyone's coming for you. So he was brought up on fraud and bribery charges and got convicted to 17 years. But after spending 5 years in the joint, he was pardoned by his buddy, President Richard Morehouse Nixon. I wonder how that happened. But that's a different Gino Story Hour. After getting out of prison, he was involved in a power struggle with the leadership who replaced him in the Teamsters. However, the mafia liked how it was currently. They weren't looking to rock the boat. So Jimmy Hoffa, on July 31st, 1975, he made a meeting with two well-known mafia bosses, Tony Provenzano, a Teamster leader from Jersey, and Tony Jack Giacalone, a capo from Detroit. Now, allegedly, those two mobsters never showed up for the meeting. They had airtight alibis. I mean, of course they did. However, Jimmy Hoffa was seen leaving the diner in a car with three other men, and that was the last time he was ever seen. Now, the FBI has been playing Where's Waldo with Jimmy Hoffa's body for over 45 years now. Over a dozen mobsters say they actually pulled the trigger, including Richard the Iceman Kuklinski, who you could watch his documentary on Netflix. He's in jail for 5 murders, but suspected of a whole bunch more, maybe up to 30. And the lead suspect is Frank the Irishman Sheeran, who the movie The Irishman is based off of, with Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Al Pacino plays Hoffa. Not the greatest Scorsese movie, but I'm not here to judge that. And most mobsters agree that are like out of the witness protection program or whatever. Most mobsters agree that is a far-fetched story, and Frank Sheeran definitely could not have killed Jimmy Hoffa. There's rumors that Jimmy Hoffa's body was in Michigan, an island off of Georgia, under a golf course, even buried in the Meadowlands under the goalposts out in Jersey. And the FBI spent over $1 million and dug a bunch of holes looking for this guy, and it come up with zero, zilch, nada. I mean, after the Meadowlands got taken down, that was like one of the big, hopes. I think everyone was like, oh, they're going to dig up Jimmy Hoffa now, because they could never do it while the Giants were playing there. But once they tore down the Meadowlands, they actually did go looking for Jimmy Hoffa and never found him. So I'm going to play this quick video here for you.
Oh, what we got? Materials?
We got materials. Let's see. How do I add this to the stage?
My father, James R. Hoffa, has been missing for some 32 hours. One of the most notorious.
Are we going to get copyright strike again?
The FBI believes Hoffa was murdered.
We're speaking over it. Do we get a copyright strike?
This is Jimmy Hoffa.
It's
a
mostly
powerful union activist vanishes without a trace. 45 years later, the search for him continues. My father, James R. Hoffa, has been missing for some 32 hours.
He left for an appointment at Max's Red Fox restaurant at approximately 1:30 p.m. Wednesday, July 30, 1975. He called home at approximately 2:15 p.m. We have not heard from him since.
The FBI and local law enforcement have taken a crack at a handful of tips over the last 10 years. In Michigan, 4 confirmed investigations made the news.
Someone is claiming to know where Jimmy Hoffa is buried. This time it's a man, though, who has long been accused of being a former mafia underboss. Tony Zerilli tells New York affiliate WNBC that Jimmy Hoffa is buried in a field in Michigan about 20 miles from where he was last seen in 1975.
Richard could not stop boasting about the murders he allegedly committed. In addition to claiming that he killed over 200 people, he even went so far as to claim he killed notorious Gambino crime figure Roy DeMeo and Teamster boss and still missing person Jimmy Hoffa.
And Jimmy Hoffa was last seen dining with mobsters in 1975, and the FBI continues its latest search this morning for the former Teamsters boss. Agents brought digging equipment to a field near Detroit yesterday. A manuscript from a reputed mobster claims Hoffa was bound and gagged, hit with a shovel, and buried alive under a cement slab. Well, authorities found a slab during Monday's dig.
We have been reporting about what happened to Jimmy Hoffa on Fox Nation, which has uncovered clues that authorities are pursuing, Sandra.
And now, John, comes word that the FBI is reportedly investigating a new tip in their search for the missing Teamsters president, focusing on a golf course on an island off the coast of Georgia.
Well, tonight we hear from a man who says he's the one who pulled the trigger, even though he and Hoffa were close friends.
Yeah, you might recognize someone here
with an exclusive detail on that.
But David Paula, mafia hitman Frank Sheeran had a euphemism for murder. Whenever he killed someone, he said they went to Australia, meaning down under the ground. The murder of Hoffa was likely related to what the mob was doing with millions of Teamster dollars here in Las Vegas. Tonight, Frank Sheeran speaks from the grave about how Jimmy Hoffa died.
And I was not then guilty, nor am I guilty now.
When he emerged from prison in the 1970s, former Teamster president Jimmy Hoffa announced he wanted his job back, even though he'd been warned by mafia associates to back off. The mob was concerned that Hoffa might reveal the connection between Teamster loans to Las Vegas casinos and the cash being skimmed from those casinos. Hoffa had to go. On the last day of his life, hours before he was killed, Hoffa placed a frantic call to Las Vegas. This FBI telex shows he phoned the Dunes Hotel to speak to his lawyer, Morris Schenker, who'd bought into the Dunes with a Teamster loan of his own. Just a few weeks earlier, Hoffa had visited Las Vegas to meet with Schenker face-to-face and with casino owner Mo Dalas, another recipient of Teamster money. Hoffa finally agreed to a sit-down with his mafia nemesis Tony Provenzano, presumably to work out their differences. They were to meet at the Red Fox restaurant in suburban Detroit. Hoffa insisted that his trusted muscle, Frank the Irishman Sheeran, be there to back him up. In mob slang, Sheeran painted houses. That is, he killed people, 25 to 30 hits in all, most carried out at the orders of mafia kingpin Russell Buffalino.
These names.
So that's most of the theories of where Jimmy Hoffa's body was and who killed him. And again, 45 years have passed, still can't find him. But I do want to talk about an important lead that I think may have been overlooked. Let me get the rest of my media ready. But I think this lead could be the key to solving the mystery of what happened to Jimmy Hoffa.
You did a PowerPoint too? I
got a PowerPoint ready for us. Okay, so the lead we need to follow up on, it happened on August 6, 1977, about 2 years after Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. Hoffa was still a constant on the front of the newspapers and in the tabloids because no one knows where this guy went. He's the hide-and-seek champ. So here's the details of what happened. This incident took place in a small town named Pelham, Georgia, approximately 950 miles as the government drone disguised as a crow flies from where Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. Here's a little overview map. At approximately 1100 hours, Mr. Dawson, our witness is one Tom Dawson, 63 years old, retired car salesman. He was out taking his dogs for a walk, and he stopped by his buddy's house, Jimmy and Linda Colby, before heading to the local fishing hole to see if the fish were biting. So at approximately 1100 hours, Mr. Dawson observes the fish, they were not biting. But he did report that approximately 40 head of cattle grazing in the nearby pasture were very peaceful. But soon that peace is broken. From above, a strange circular object suddenly flashed out of the sky and came down in front of him, hovering a few feet from the ground. He said about 3 to 4 feet. The craft was silent, which we hear all the time. It was about 40 to 50 feet in diameter and about 15 feet tall in the center, and had an antenna, which it's sort of like the McMillanville photos from 1950. Here's a picture of the McMillan photos, very famous photo, one of the first photos of a UAP. It had what our witness described as portals around the entire craft. Here's a sketch drawing from our witness. And it had a very small hatch on the bottom side of the craft. And it was silvery when he first saw it. However, the metal seems to turn multiple colors as it was getting closer to him, similar to the craft that was seen in the Kentucky Goblins incident. So Dawson,
which is also a famous Gino Story Hour.
Yeah. So Dawson found himself paralyzed, but not with fright. He was unable to move he couldn't move a muscle. All he could move was his eyes back and forth. And he noticed that his dogs and the cattle were also in this frozen state. So he's there. His eyes are darting back and forth. He could see this craft coming down. And as soon as the UFO stopped, a hatch opened up, and the first of our 7 persons of interest steps out. Dawson labeled this guy as the chief. He seemed to go down and check the ground to make sure it was stable, which is an interesting detail, because you think if you're coming down in a craft, they would know what the medium is that they're coming down to. I'm like wondering if before that happened, like maybe they came down once before and it turned out it was the ocean. I would have liked to see that blooper reel. Alien does a unintentional belly flop. The chief bends down and checks the ground. He calls out in like a strange chirping language, and from the craft, out come his 6 accomplices. So the witness describes the subjects number 2 through number 5 as about 5 feet tall humanoids. 3 of them men, one of them a woman. Their skin was pale white. Their noses were sharp and turned up. It's hard to imagine what that would look like. Their ears were also pointed, and they had no necks. Like their bodies, like their heads were just kind of floating there on their bodies. So let's see if I could pull up some. Here's another witness sketch. So these first 4, they're all dressed similar to what the chief looks like. They're in stylish 2-piece metallic blue-green outfits described as tight but billowy, and were a beautiful dragonfly type color. That our witness used those words, beautiful dragonfly type color. So I guess even in all his fright and fear, he could, determine good style. They were all wearing shoes that looked historically elvish or gnomish, like silky and like turned up at the toe. Strange. And 2 of them got out and kind of stood guard next to the vehicle. And the others started collecting leaves and rocks and shrubbery from around the pond. And again, our guy Tom he's just stuck there, can't do anything. He's just watching this in horror. Now the last 2, a male and a female, come strolling out of the craft, and they're in the buff. Well, almost, not exactly. They had no hair on their bodies, and they were anatomically similar to humans. They didn't have any clothes on.
They were just dangling out in the breeze.
Yeah, and you can see in this picture here a depiction of
No,
the ones
we
with
don't need.
clothes
We don't need to see that.
and the ones without. So, the only thing they had on was they had on the weird little shoes. So they were allowed to wear the shoes. I don't know why they weren't allowed to wear the clothes, but they were allowed to wear the shoes.
Sometimes you just wanted to keep the shoes on.
Yeah, you know.
But the chat is very excited that Gina Rodica making a comeback.
I mean, this is definitely not what I want to see in my alien encounter. I don't want to, be frozen and see two naked aliens coming at me, even if it is a hot female alien. So, let's see here. So subjects number 6 and 7, the bold intergalactic nudists start approaching Mr. Dawson carrying this metallic-like looking hula hoop object with a skull cap in the middle of it. It looked like it had some wires on it, some buttons and lights and levers on it. And they walked over to him, and when the beanie was placed on his head, all of a sudden his fear subsided instantly. So now he's just hanging out there, eyes moving back and forth, darting back and forth, but no fear anymore. So he has a calmness that comes over him. He could tell they were doing some kind of medical diagnostic on him, but they were speaking to each other in this chirping language that he couldn't understand. It was at this point that our suspect stripped down Mr. Dawson, leaving his pants around his ankles. Again, not what you want out of your alien encounter, especially you're out there, grazing with the cows in a field. You don't want to be, without your pants. They placed a cluster of like orange luminous suction cups all over his body, including his private parts, which aren't so private at that moment. And then the chief and the nudists begin fiddling around with the buttons and, on the ring. And the ring starts to descend to his waist. So it's kind of like circling around him. And it's connected to like a box that they put on his chest. And but again, they're like excitedly speaking to each other, but in like chirps. So far, this story is more or less a typical close encounter, I would say. However, here's where it takes an insane turn.
Oh, here's where it takes an insane turn?
Well, remember how our story started. It was at this point, Mr. Dawson
level the enigma wrapped in a tortilla of whatever the hell this is.
So it was at this point, Mr. Dawson, still pants down, heard a voice screaming from inside the UFO. And he was sure of it. It was a human male voice, and it sounded terrified. And in a terrified scream, he could hear, "I am Jimmy Hoffa. I am Jimmy Hoffa. I am Jimmy Hoffa. I am." And then his cry was suddenly stifled, as if someone had put a hand over Jimmy Hoffa, who's screaming out for help. So now that he hears Jimmy Hoffa's hiding out in there, all he could think of is they're going to snatch him up. Also, because now he's a witness to their Jimmy Hoffa abduction. So he's worried. He's still got the hat on, but he's worried that he's going for a ride with them. The screaming seems to startle all of our suspect aliens there. They quickly huddled up about 10 feet away, and Mr. Dawson knows that they're talking about him because they're chirping around and looking at him. And the two of the male subjects keep giving them the stink eye. So they seem pissed. And so he's sitting there, suspended animation, wondering what's going to happen next. They're chirping away. And he thinks that he hears the word Jupiter. I mean, I don't know why that would be the only English word they know how to say is Jupiter, but he thinks that's what he hears out of their chirps. So,
okay, now things are making sense.
So apparently, they decided against taking him. One of the nudies grabs the galactic hula hoop, and they start rushing back into the craft. As soon as they rush into the craft, the hatch closes up, and it shoots up about 75 feet in the air and took off in a flash. I guess, once they found out that Jimmy Hoffa was there, they wanted to get the hell out of Dodge.
Viper's pretty sure that Jupiter's the safe word.
So as soon as that happened,
Oh God.
Dawson, he was able to move again, and so were the animals. So he went running back to the Colby's house, where he was before he went down to the fishing hole, and Mrs. C was out there doing some lawn work. Now, Tom was in really bad shape. He's an old dude, so he's running top speed. He's in his 60s. He's running top speed, waving his arms around, trying to catch his breath. And she tried to calm him down, thinking he must have got bit by a snake or something playing around in the cow pasture. However, the only thing he could say, trying to catch his breath, was spaceship. So
wait, what was it? What was that?
Spaceship. He said spaceship.
Oh.
So so he couldn't get any words out. So that's the only word he was able to get out was spaceship. So his friends know something's wrong, and they rush him up to the hospital, where he gets treated for hysteria, of course, which happens to so many abductees. The doctors checked him out to see if he was on any drugs or alcohol, and he came up 100% negative. And he didn't want to go to the cops or anything, but one of the nurses on duty called the local newspaper, who sent over a few reporters. Of course, they heard Jimmy Hoffa, aliens. They had to get their scoop, Our witnesses continued, the witness, Mr. Dawson, continued to insist that he knew what happened, and there was no doubt in his mind it happened just as he described. He said he thinks that they would have taken him if he was a younger guy, but because he was old, maybe things didn't work the right way for what they had in store. I don't know. I mean, Mr. Dawson, he had no history of mental illness, and this was the first time anything even remotely similar to this happened to him. He's lived a pretty normal life as a car salesman.
Maybe someone can punch me in the face and see if that helps.
So the story's not over. The next day,
but it's getting close.
It's getting close. Getting close. The next day, some guys show up at the hospital asking for statements and how to contact the subjects. So the men were described as dressed in all black with olive skin and spoke mostly with a slightly foreign accent, and we all know who that is. There's a picture on the screen there. So now we got some men in black show up. They started taking soil samples and witness statements from the doctors, the nurses. They went over to the Colby's houses, and Mrs. Colby asked what organization they were from, and they replied, MUFOC. Not MUFON, but MUFOC, which, would make more sense as MUFON, but she was careful to write it down because it sounded so strange to her. Now, they told her that they were from Macon, Georgia, so she assumed those letters stood for Macon UFO Club. But of course, she also said they didn't look like they were from Georgia, and they certainly didn't talk like they were. So after all this, Mr. Dawson never wanted to talk about it further. He never wrote a book, never tried to make any money. Everyone who got interviewed about him described him as a credible family man. He wasn't the type to make up wild stories or anything like that. So, I mean, and that's the end of the story. I mean, so now that I've proven pretty much beyond a reasonable doubt what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, I expect the FBI to start taking some of my phone calls more seriously. And if you enjoyed this story, please go to cavemancoffeeco.com and use the promo code YFiles or the YFiles for 20% off your Java 51, the best coffee blend in the galaxy. It's out of this world. And that is Gino's Story Hour for tonight.
I had to write this down. The nudies grabbed the galactic hula hoop.
Oh shit, where he go? Tell me something I don't know. Where's Gino? Oh shit.
God.